Rishi Sunak's election gamble is not paying off. From a quickly deleted advert warning voters not to bet on Labour to a betting scandal that's engulfed his own party.
I put a bet on myself using the F word several times in this episode. I'm Nish Kumar.
And I'm Coco Khan, and this is Pod Save the UK.
With 1 week to go until polling day, we'll be discussing Gamblegate, the return of ugly culture wars, and looking back on the campaign.
And to chew through it all with us, we're joined by political correspondent and friend of the show, Liz Bates, Lizzie B to her the girls. But first,
we are conducting inquiries, as I say, at the moment in parallel, because I don't have details of the Gambling Commission's inquiries. They're independent of us.
But it's not really a case of they might have acted in that way. Craig Williams has admitted it.
Again, there are very serious independent investigations.
He was your PPX. He's let you down, hasn't he?
There are very serious independent investigations being conducted, including by the police. And that's why it's not appropriate for me to provide a running commentary on that.
That was Rishi Sunak, the man with, I think, the least fun job in the Western world on ITV News, discussing the revelation that members of the Conservative Party have been embroiled in a gambling scandal. At the time of recording, at least 15 Tories are involved in allegedly placing bets around the timing of the UK general election in what has to be the dumbest way the Conservative Party could have blown up its own political campaign. Two of them were candidates running in the election, Craig Williams and Laura Saunders. The Tories dragged their feet, taking action initially, but those two candidates have now been deselected. Craig Williams is said to be Sunak's closest parliamentary aide. The remaining three are Nick Mason, who's the Conservative Party's chief data officer, campaign director Tony Lee, and Russell George, a Conservative member of the Senate, the Welsh shadow cabinet. Earlier this week, Sunak said that he's not aware of any further allegations, which, well, it's not exactly a ringing endorsement of the state of the Tories right now. And if I had to put money on anything, it's that I've had to re-record the number that I just said, and we've had to digitally insert it into what I've just said. So I've no idea what that total is. It's at time of recording, insert number here.
Hi, Liz.
Hiya.
We've not caught up with you for a few weeks. Last time we spoke, the idea of national service had been just floated. Since then, we've had the D-Day disaster and the betting scandal. Been a bit awful, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I actually thought the betting scandal, I thought, it's going to be one guy. It's still terrible. End on a scandal. Just to remind everybody that this is a party that has been totally scandal-ridden, absolutely, gutted in terms of any kind of integrity. And then, surely it's a one-off. No.
Yeah.
No, they've all been doing it.
Do you know what? When I see Rishi Sunak these days, and for clarity, when I say I feel sorry for him, it's like a very fleeting thought. But it always reminds me of, do you remember that book John Ronson did, So You've Been Publicly Shamed? And it's, it sort of focuses on people that suddenly endure a moment of national or even international notoriety for something stupid that they've done. Like, he is the pinnacle of that. Obviously, it's deserved, the public shaming of him. But I had this thought where I was like, where can this man go in the Western world? Nowhere.
My favourite thing about this is that the reason this all started is that Craig Williams was reported to the Gambling Commission by Ladbrokes, which is the gambling company, which means the Conservative Party's ethics have now stooped so low that they are able to be lectured on ethics by the gambling industry. Just when you think they can't get any lower, they limbo under a low bar they set themselves. One of the big issues is that Sunak came into government vowing to put an end to sleaze. And he actually said this, which even as I'm reading it feels like a joke. He said that we would lead the world in standards of integrity, decency and leadership.
But he didn't say in which way.
It's interesting because I've seen a couple of tweets from political correspondents saying that, in the grand scheme of things, people have been always between themselves talking about, when do you think the election will be? When do you think the election will be? Some of them might have put a bet on it. It's not that big of a deal. And in a way, I can kind of see that argument. But then the other side of it is just like, oh, come on, have some common sense about what's appropriate and not so appropriate. And I think that is why this scandal has gotten so big, because it epitomizes everything that the public hate. It shows a lack of common sense into people's standards of decency.
I think it's important not to conflate the two things together, which is if you were in the room when Rishi Sunak was like, right, okay, we're going to call a general election tomorrow, and then you went off to the bookies and put some money on it, that is bad.
Yes.
That is having no integrity. If you are working in politics, talking about it a lot, thinking about it, there's loads of rumours going around, you have a punt on it and you get it right, that's okay.
Yeah.
That is actually okay. So I think it's important to draw a distinction between those two things.
I would actually disagree with you, Liz. I think that maybe it is okay, but just any amount of thinking about how it would land with the public, I think you'd come to the conclusion it might look off.
But I just think it's important not to water down what people did, which was the worst thing.
Yeah.
Was if you really did have access to privileged information and you use that to enrich yourself.
Of course, yeah.
That is really bad. And it also, I think, especially in this election campaign, probably for a lot of people, encapsulates in their minds what the Conservatives have been doing for a long time, which is using that power, using that privilege to personally enrich themselves.
Well, that's sort of the point, isn't it, right? Because this sits very comfortably in a story that the public essentially has fixed in its mind about the Conservative Party, right? This is another link in a chain that includes private contracts going to friends of the Conservative Party for delivering PPE to the government during the pandemic. It just joins another link in the chain with all the Partygate scandals. Michael Gove, someone who I imagine whose real job these days, especially now that he's leaving politics, is just going to be freelance backstabbing. Just he's available. If you have someone that you want to have stabbed in the back, Michael Gove is now just at large and available to do that for you.
He's just doing it in his personal life now. He's just turning up at family events, just stabbing family members in the back for fun. He just can't stop himself.
He came out this week and said, it looks like it's one rule for them and one rule for us. That's the most potentially damaging thing. That was damaging at the time of Partygate and is damaging here. Even Conservative peer Lord Frost tweeted, we got there in the end, but why did it take so long to come to a decision that seemed so necessary right from the start? That's the problem, isn't it? It's that the one thing Sunak has tried to impress upon the public is that he is distinct from his immediate predecessors.
Yeah, and I think this particular scandal kind of gets to the heart of probably what is going on generally with Rishi Sunak and has it throughout his premiership, which is he's been unlucky. This was not his fault. He didn't do this, but then he didn't deal with it in a way that lives up to those standards that he set for himself. Why did it take him so long to suspend them? It made me think as well of the Frank Hester, Diane Abbott comment. Why didn't he give that money back? You condemn it, but then he always, it takes him too long, and sometimes he doesn't get to those standards of integrity.
And there's always a surprise from him that people are annoyed. He's like, wow, I can't believe everyone's so annoyed about this. I can't believe this is, you get this sense
tetchy
from him
Yeah.
that, he cannot understand why the members of the general public would find this annoying. And that's the disconnect, isn't it? It embodies the disconnect between them and people's actual values and what they think is important in terms of dignity. We did mention last week that polling suggests that Craig Williams might have been one of the only Tories left in Wales. This might mean a complete wipeout for them there.
They keep using this word that doesn't actually make any political sense, but they keep saying there's going to be a supermajority for the Labour Party. The Conservative Party
I'm so against that word, by the way.
I know, it's so stupid. But it doesn't, but there's this consistent idea that, we're going to be delivering essentially a one-party state. And what I would say is, whose fault is that? Actually, whose fault is that? Because the Conservative Party keeps telling us that the public is not enthused by Keir Starmer. And there's a lot of polling to suggest that the public is not enthused by Keir Starmer, right? So then whose fault is it? If Keir Starmer is such an uninspiring leader, which many of us think he is, whose fault is it that he is able... He's potentially able to turn the country into one party? It's entirely the fault of the Conservative Party.
And I also there's a kind of, when you start to unpick that idea around, don't let Labour have a supermajority because they'll deliver their manifesto.
On Sunday, Sky News reported the Gambling Commission was investigating many more people that was currently public and was asking betting firms to provide details of all bets over £20 on the election day. Since then, one police officer has been placed under investigation and more information has come out that a further 5 police officers placed bets. The police behaving unethically.
I cannot believe it.
Is nothing sacred in this country anymore. Here's the thing that I want to ask you, because when D-Day happened, when D-Day 2D Day happened, a lot of the journalism at the time was saying, well, this is his Gillian Duffy moment. This is the single moment of failure that will forever be used to encapsulate the entire campaign. And credit to Rishi Sunak for diversifying his portfolio of failure. is this the moment that he's going to be remembered?
Also, I'm like just obsessed with the detail that it's bets over £20. You know, for the cheapskates that did a £5, you're safe. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
But no, you're right. Every time it's like, hold my beer, I've got something worse is coming. For sure.
What's he going to do?
I don't know.
Is he going to shit his pants and then wipe his arse with the crown jewels? Like, I'm genuinely like, I'm struggling to conceptualise.
It's going to be like, do you remember that Super Bowl where Justin Timberlake accidentally pulled off Janet Jackson?
Yeah.
It'll be like that with a member of the royal family.
Yeah.
It'll be like Queen
grab
Camilla.
grab the king's crotch or something.
But hey, that's not it for scandals this week. Cast your minds back to the week the election was called. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan delivered up a steaming bowl of word soup, trying to explain the evidence behind the government's new guidance to ban schools from talking about gender identity. The government claimed, in their words, that the contested ideology of gender was being taught to kids. Here's a quick refresher of Keegan speaking to the BBC's Charlie State.
So the evidence is things like choosing lots of different sort of genders and identities and saying which ones of these are gender identities, the spectrum, it can be a spectrum, it's fluid, you can have different genders on different days or different, there's 72 of them, that kind of thing. Yes, there has been evidence.
And that was taught by a teacher in a classroom.
We've received evidence with those slides to say that they've been taught in classrooms.
That is hard to listen to. Like, you're sort of just having to dull your ears to try and make any sense out of it whatsoever. But we did talk about this at the time. Keegan and even Rishi Sunak were parroting this line that there are 72 genders being taught in schools, which has been dismissed as untrue. At the time, a barrister called Sam Fowles wanted to get even further to the bottom of this, so he put in a Freedom of Information request to the Department for Education. He stated, please disclose all evidence held of a school or schools in the UK teaching that there are 72 genders. And now, a few weeks later, the Department of Education replied, and it's a doozy. Their response begins, following a search of the department's paper and electronic records, I have established that the information you requested is not held by this department. But it continues. The department does not systematically collect information on what is taught by schools. However, the Secretary of State was made aware of the well-documented concerns about externally produced resources in this area that have been designed for use in the classroom. It then cited two reports as sources. The first is called Asleep at the Wheel, published by the Policy Exchange, and the second is from the New Social Covenant, called What is Being Taught in Relationship and Sex Education in Our Schools. The department says these reports, and I quote, contain examples of materials that schools are encouraged to use when teaching about gender and sexual orientation.
So, Liz, let's begin by just talking about Keegan's claims that she'd seen this evidence. Honestly, when she said gender so many times, a part of me thought that the 72 genders was just the amount of times she said it. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's their evidence. They just say it 72 times. But if the Department for Education doesn't have anything that backs this up, where could it have come from?
Well, it sounds a bit like it's been made up, doesn't it? I mean, I'm no detective. I'm no detective. That sounds a little bit made up to me. And I'm also slightly disturbed by the name New Social Covenant.
Yeah, it's an organisation founded by two Conservative MPs, Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger, who have, and it says here they have long-held traditionalist beliefs.
Which is a nice way to put it, isn't it?
Yeah, if somebody tells me that there's a room full of traditionalists, I think, I'm about to get racially abused. Like that. That's just me. That's just me.
Nish, that's just their traditions. Please be tolerant of their traditions.
Sorry, Liz, but you were saying?
Certainly there's no source the department can identify which suggests that it's true. It's
an incredible thing. So just to clarify, the two organisations that we've mentioned, Policy Exchange are a right-wing think tank that the transparency website Who Funds You ranks at the lowest possible grade of transparency. One of their donors we do know about is ExxonMobil, who are a large fuel company, so it might not surprise you that the think tank has also helped draft laws targeting climate activists. The author of the report, Asleep at the Wheel, Lottie Moore, is also a self-confessed gender critic.
And speaking of self-confessed gender critics, we have Miriam Cates. We were talking about the traditionalists earlier from the New Social Covenant Unit. So in 2021, Cates warned schools in Parliament against inviting leading LGBTQ rights charities Stonewall and Mermaids to provide counselling services as they teach, and she said, dangerous and contested extreme ideologies that don't have a basis in science.
But what we're getting at here is these are not truly independent sources. It's very concerning that there's no evidence for the claims the government has made on 72 genders. And the evidence that they're citing when talking about gender ideology being taught in schools is developed by two very compromised sources. Now, look, we did actually ask the Department for Education to comment on this. They said they could not provide an on-the-record statement for us and could only provide further background information, which continued to quote a survey done from the Policy Exchange, one of the right-wing think tanks we mentioned earlier.
So one of our listeners, Dante Elkington, got in touch with us and said, I'm a teacher at a special needs school and I'm a transgender man. It's such a shame that the Education Secretary is plucking this misleading and just plain wrong information with no evidence of accountability. I have found that my students are so open-minded and accepting, willing to understand in a way that does not other me, and have shown me such support. It reminds me of how wonderful children are and that there is hope for the future of trans care. We should also look at how Labour have weighed in on this. Just this week, they have failed to commit to withdrawing the draft guidance if they came into power. On Monday, Keir Starmer said, no, I'm not in favour of ideology being taught in our schools on gender. And over the weekend, Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson commented on the issue to the BBC's Laura Kuenssberg.
Would you ditch the ban on teaching the concept of gender identity?
No, there are trans people within society and their existence should be recognised.
So you wouldn't ditch that?
This drifts, I think, sometimes into a slightly bizarre conversation. There are trans people. They have a right for their existence to be recognised. Many trans people are vulnerable and are deserving of support. Alongside that, we've got to make sure that schools have got clear guidance about how best to support children and young people that are experiencing distress and issues around their well-being.
I was just so glad to hear a politician just say trans people exist and they have a right to dignity. Like, this is such an obvious thing to say, but it hasn't been said. I mean, the Conservative press, they are declaring that Labour has a woman problem. I mean, is this actually a political problem for Labour? Do you think this could actually lose them votes? Is this an actual issue?
I mean, one voter who it is a high priority for is J.K. Rowling, who in an op-ed in The Times said that she would struggle to vote for Labour. And Labour has been going sort of above and beyond to try and appease her. Wes Streeting has called her remarks depressing. And the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has offered Rowling a meeting ahead of the general election. I do find that very strange, that's being offered. As you know, J.K. Rowling is an author of books and is not an expert on any of these subjects. Beyond having a very active Twitter profile, it feels oligarch adjacent. If you're that wealthy that you can just demand and have the party acquiesce to your demands to just have a meeting to talk about something that's got your goat. It does feel quite strange to me. In other news, Labour have recommitted to simplifying gender recognition certificates, and we did speak about this briefly in our special episode with Freddie McConnell and Abigail Thorne. Check it out if you haven't already. So it really is 1 week to go until we all get out and cast our votes. Yes, you. We're talking to you specifically. And over this whole election, we've had an amazing amount of messages and questions from all of you listening and watching. First of all, thank you for getting in touch. And given that we only have 7 days remaining, we thought we'd spend some time delving into the mailbag, hearing from all of you with the help of Liz and maybe answering a question or two. So first off, Joseph Gander has said, a question that is twisting my melon. First of all, Joseph, congratulations on your Manchester reference. Why have Labour and the Lib Dems not signed a non-aggression pact? I would expect this arrangement could likely put the Lib Dems into opposition, the Tories into the boondocks, and the country could start dragging the Overton window back towards the centre, surely. Well, Joseph, a senior reporter of the FT, Chris Cook, reported earlier this week that an analysis of Labour's campaign sites show them backing off in Lib Dem target seats. Liz, do we think this is something that is... We spoke to Neil Lawson, who talked a lot on a previous episode about how in 1997 there was a sort of semi-formal non-aggression pact between Tony Blair's Labour Party and Paddy Ashdown's Liberal Democrats. Do you think that is there something happening here?
Yeah, for sure. But it's so the reason that there's no formal pact between Labour and the Lib Dems to get rid of the Tories, so one of them stands back in one seat and vice versa, is because it's just not democratic.
Yeah.
That just wouldn't be fair to people that wanted to vote for either party if they literally formally withdrew candidates or totally withdrew support or whatever, or endorsed another candidate from another party. But it all happens quite naturally. And I've been to a lot of by-elections where, especially recently, where, one of the parties, the Liberal Democrats or Labour, could beat the Conservatives. And they just, you can tell that one is absolutely throwing resources at the election, and they've got, hundreds of activists there knocking on doors, and they've got loads of literature, etc. And the other party is not doing that so much. You even find it where I went to the Selby and Ainsty by-election, where the Tories were defeated there by Labour, and you could tell there that there was one area that was a Liberal Democrat area that they needed to work it quite hard for the general election because it was going to go into a different seat at the general election because of boundary changes. Labour hadn't bothered to campaign in that area. So they'd basically done the whole bit where all the Labour support was, and then they'd left the other bit to the Liberal Democrats to give them a fair run at it for the general. So it's even it gets down to like a micro level like that. Occasionally they kind of end up fighting each other because neither one will back off. But mostly it sort of happens quite naturally.
The only people I feel sorry for in this are the cannon fodder candidates. Those are the people. The people I feel really sorry for it's whoever the Labour candidates or Liberal Democrat candidates are in an area where they've clearly had no resources.
Do you know what? My mate, his mum, this is only at councillor level, but she's the cannon fodder candidate for the Labour Party. And she knows what her job is. She's like, I'm here to lose, but I'm here to show that we have a presence. I respect. If you are cannon fodder, good for you.
People always genuinely ask me if I would go into politics. And I'm always like, no, of course, I'm profoundly underqualified. But we finally found a job I'm qualified for in politics. We finally found a place where I could conceivably run, and that is as a cannon fodder candidate.
Professional loser, Nish Kumar.
I could just write off the next 20 years of my career and just go election to election, different constituencies, just being the candidate that tanks your vote.
So next up, we have a question from Joel. They say, why haven't we talked more about government corruption and fraud during the election with how much money has been wasted and committed to fraudulent things? The PPE scandal, the SNP corruption. What do you think? Do you think that if we talked about that, we would drum up some money to plug holes in social care and potholes and stuff?
Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, who wrote in to say that?
Joel.
I love you.
Okay.
I agree with you. We should hang out because that is literally what I think. I mean, that is what genuinely keeps me, apart from my baby and my various mental health issues.
And your Michael Gove blanket, which you told us about earlier.
Yes, I do have a Michael Gove blanket, but I think we should move on quite quickly from that. But which I don't sleep under.
Thank God you clarified that.
I should say. And it was a gift. I didn't buy it myself. For me, one of the biggest things over that happened during the last government was that fraud.
Yeah.
What was it? 20 billion. That is just in fraud. That we're not talking about the dodgy PPE contracts, the PPE that never worked, the handing contracts to your mates. That's totally separate. There was billions lost in fraud by a system designed by our government. That money, where is the plan to recoup that money? And more than that, why aren't these people in prison?
Yeah.
That's a crime. I was thinking back on it this morning and thinking, do you remember the London riots?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, those kids were like, their feet didn't touch the floor. They were straight through the courts, a lot of them first offences, no hesitation. It was like, a crime has happened. We need to make sure that will never happen again. Where is the same plan?
Yeah.
We have been robbed.
Yeah.
We have literally been robbed. The people who robbed us are walking amongst us. And why haven't we discussed it?
It's so funny you mentioned the London riots there, because that's been a criticism of Keir Starmer, right? He was Director of Public Prosecutions at that time. And, I can't believe Keir Starmer, of all people, hasn't taken this line
Yeah.
I mean, it would be so relevant for him to take it.
It's so easy. It's, I don't understand why it isn't front and centre of somebody's election campaign, especially because it comes up time and time again when you do the focus groups. Yeah. One of the things that voters say, and to people campaigning on the doorstep, is one of the reasons that trust has been corroded so much in British politics, and the reason that people don't trust politicians is because of all that stuff that went on. It was a case of, it was a time of national emergency, so we had to relax the rules, and we expected that people in public life would act in the right way, and some of them did not. They literally they just took money illegally from the state, from us. And there has been no discussion on how we're going to get that back.
Yes, that's a very good question, Joel. And apparently Liz wants to hang out with you. So
yes, do get in touch.
Liliana got in touch to ask, this will be my first election I'm old enough to vote in, and I'd love some insight on policies on disability payments. Conservatives have caused me a lot of anxiety with how they've been talking about PIP payments, and as it is something that enables me to live, I want to pick the party that will protect this the best. Can we speak to that based on the manifestos? Do we know anything specific?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is Liliana's anxiety about the Conservatives is completely fair. They have essentially pledged to cut payments to the tune of around £12 billion a year. So I think that is a fair anxiety to have. And the Conservatives were also seeking to tighten the work capability assessment, which would basically see more disabled people declared fit to work. As for the other parties, I mean, with Labour, I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, Liz, but there was some really good murmurs coming from the Labour Party last year. One of the things they committed to was the United Nations Convention on Rights for People with Disabilities. They talked about reforming the assessments. And actually, when it came to the manifesto, a lot of that was absent. Now, obviously, the manifesto is often absent. That's the sort of theme of the manifesto, because they don't want to show their cards. But I completely understand why that would be anxiety-inducing.
I mean, the manifesto was just a kind of play it safe manifesto. Yeah. They don't want to put anything in that manifesto that people can question where the money's going to come from. Because that's just a constant problem for the Labour Party. So I think it'd be interesting to see what they do in government, but no concrete promises on that. And I think as a system, it's been messed with by various governments over many years, and there's probably a case for a serious kind of reassessment and reform of it. What we do know, of course, is the Liberal Democrats. Yes. Ed Davey has put at the centre of his, I mean, this isn't a kind of detailed policy announcement, but he has put care, and including care for his disabled son, at the centre of their policy platform. So I think certainly they're prioritising it.
So I talked earlier about how Labour didn't mention that UN convention. The Liberal Democrats did mention it. They also talked about increasing the hourly rate of care for formal carers. They talk about the introduction of free care for disabled people at home. Other things that, relate to this is, of course, like scrapping the bedroom tax, which, disproportionately affects people with disabilities. They also talked about replacing sanctions with incentives. Again, that tends to affect people with disabilities, and improving PIP assessments. Improving is, again, quite vague, but all of that is a bit closer in the right direction. And then, of course, you've got the Greens. They seem to come out quite good on this. They talk about restoring the value of disability benefits with an immediate uplift of 5%. They want to reform the intrusive tests, free personal care again. But you always have that thing with the Greens being like, well, you're not going to get in though, isn't it? So, and the same for the Lib Dems. So I don't think we can answer your question about who's the best on this. But the good news is that there are parties talking about it, and we've talked about a progressive alliance on this podcast, and about, the left of the Labour Party working with the Lib Dems and the Greens. So there's some hope there that at least those other parties are putting it front and centre, even if maybe not as robustly as you really need.
I think, again, though, it's one of those things that when you look back at the coverage of the election campaign, there are so many different areas where you could go back and say, there hasn't been a kind of sensible, detailed policy discussion. We can't come to the end of it and say, okay, we really know where everybody stands. So as a disabled person, you can very easily choose which party to vote for, because you know which one is going to support you best. And I think that's I think we can blame generally the kind of political system, but also, the journalistic coverage as well. I think there's more to do on that.
I also think this is almost a separate issue that we, ironically, don't really even have time to get into, but the absence of the conversation about the climate in this election is so extraordinary. Like, it's extraordinary. There's extreme weather events happening all over the world. It feels absolutely unfathomable to me. The lack of scrutiny about the different parties' climate policies is, I just think that, it's one of those things where you sort of go, the only plus side of this is that this won't be something people look back on historically, because there will be no history because everyone will be dead. That's the only silver lining to this, is we won't be judged by future generations because they'll be too busy fighting in a road war. Like, I think in 2019, Channel 4 did actually try to have a specific climate-focused debate, which Boris Johnson obviously famously did not turn up for, and was replaced by a steadily melting ice sculpture, which actually ended up making more sense and violating fewer lockdown regulations than the actual man himself. But the void in our political conversation about the most pressing issue facing this planet is absolutely unfathomable.
It's all the and it's easy for me to sit here on my lovely blue velvet sofa and talk about, there's a lack of joined up thinking, but climate affects health outcomes. We talked about the Lib Dems and their manifesto, and yes, it does sound quite good, but there's, they don't talk about universal credit. Lots of people with health issues need to get universal credit, and they're not talking about the uplift there. So, it's like this, it's small pieces of the puzzle, and I think we can agree that all of them are not quite doing it. And
you just can't be healthy if you're underwater.
Yeah. Or if you don't have good housing, which is full of black mould, so then you have to talk about housing as well. It's
I mean, we're literally in that film Don't Look Up. That's where we're heading. Because you can't, it's just because you just can't, it's so difficult to get into in British politics, because as soon as you start to talk about net zero or whatever, there's always someone that's like, but what about the potholes? And you're like, honey, the potholes aren't going to be there.
Yeah.
Everything's going to be on fire.
All right, listeners, so you might have remembered that once upon a time, British Labour Member of Parliament David Lammy was on Pod Save the UK.
Well, he's back at it, this time on our sister podcast, Pod Save the World, to co-host with Ben Rhodes.
The episode just dropped yesterday, and they talked all about the upcoming British elections and how a Labour foreign policy would address the world's most pressing issues, like Israel and Gaza, Russia and Ukraine, and the rise of the far right.
Head over to the Pod Save the World feed to listen now. And now, to close out the show, we're bringing you one more round of WTF moments, the maddest and weirdest stories from the last week of the campaign.
So first up, we have party leaders recording themselves playing the online game Minecraft in an effort to appeal to Gen Z voters. Nigel Farage blows up Rishi Sunak's home, Sunak kills a chicken with a chainsaw, and here's Keir Starmer installing a trapdoor in Farage's online pub.
Nigel has been going around griefing both mine and Rishi's bases on the server. I believe it's high time we put a stop to this once and for all. So some of you may be wondering how I plan on getting my revenge. Well, let me show you. I've actually taken the liberty to locate Nigel's favourite spot on the server, which is this little pub you can see here. And before you all start asking, no, this is not the same one where that girl hilariously threw a milkshake over him. So as you can see here, I've set up a trapdoor powered by these pressure plates. When he walks through the door, he will fall all the way down into this pit. And I've actually prepared a nice little surprise for him when he gets down there. So chat, let's wait for him to get online and see what happens.
Of course, that video, which seems too good to be true, is absolutely too good to be true. It is 100% fake. It's a deep fake made using AI to mimic a person's voice and facial features. But they were convincing enough to get a mention on BBC's Newsnight.
It's interesting to see this election, the amount the parties have invested in TikTok and campaigning there. And Nigel Farage again doing these Minecraft videos as well. There's a much more diffuse media market than there was. Lots of people get their news from social media.
I would just urge people at all times, just check just watch it really closely. Because if you do, you can see that there is no way what Keir Starmer is saying in that video can be coming out of his mouth.
So next up, here's Nick Robinson whipping out a burger during his Green Party election interview with Adrian Ramsey. That's right, a meaty burger.
And to be fair, the UK Climate Change Committee, which advises all government talks about it, the need for us to eat less meat in our diet, cutting the amount they say by a fifth in a decade, by a third by 2050. Now, what that means to most people watching this programme is in here. 2.5 billion of these burgers are eaten every year in the UK. Are you saying that to save the climate, we've got to ban the burger, or we've got to make burgers a heck of a lot more expensive?
No, neither of those proposals are in our manifesto. What is in our manifesto is supporting our farmers to produce far more food
but
within
I'm not asking
UK.
just what you put in an election sales document. I'm arguing that the Greens have always argued for eating less meat. So in the end, would it have to be more expensive?
As I say, that's not a policy that's in our manifesto. And our manifesto is about what we want to put forward for this next 5 years.
Just for the benefit of people listening to the show, Nick Robinson, who was conducting that interview with Adrian Ramsey, when that shuffling you could hear was the sound of him producing a beef burger, opening it and
from
waving it around.
From an unmarked box, I noticed.
From an unmarked box. He was holding... You know when I said we need to have more conversations about the climate? I think we might need to have less conversations about the climate.
I'm interested in the thought, who suggested that, because there's so many things that you talk about in political discussions. Like, why was it just that one thing that they were like, and we need to show it because no one's going to really know. No one's going to be able to imagine a beef burger. Like, I just don't get the thought process behind it. Also, if you're going to do it, just get like a big sausage and waggle it in his face. Well, don't go half-assed.
There was definitely a part of me that thought that, because he was wafting, there was a wafting of the burger, right? And a part of me thought, he's going to eat the burger and be like, delicious burger, or just start like narrating its juices or something. And I think what he wanted was to provoke some sort of disgust or provoke some sort of outrage reaction from some, like, obviously clearly some caricatured idea about what a vegan is. Do you know what I mean? Like, vegans aren't just like at the sight of any meat, like they have to like leave the building. That's not what happens.
Controversially, I'm going to say maybe more political interviews should just have props and things in them. Like, you're talking about sewage, you're just like, and this, I got this turd. What do you think of this, huh? Or like you're talking about, I brought a child with me to talk about education. Tell this child that you're going to cut the education budget.
Do you know what? I think that might be effective. Yeah. That might be actually quite good. But anyway, we're not...
I think that is one of the stupidest fucking things I've ever seen in my life. Like, I really feel like we're all being very polite here. Obviously, I am not comparing. Nick Robinson is a fantastic, brilliant political interviewer. That is one of the stupidest fucking things I've ever seen in my goddamn life. That is the sort of thing that when I see a conversation about the climate involve a journalist waving a beef burger in a politician's face, that makes me think we deserve apocalypse.
It's almost as well like the way that they'd imagined it was he was going to wave in his face and Adrian Ramsey was going to go, no, just slap it out of his hand.
So for this next WTF, we're returning to the gambling scandal, but this time it's one of Labour's candidates and it's not quite what you think. No betting on the election date.
No, it was a Labour candidate who bet on himself losing his own seat. Kevin Craig is Labour's candidate for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, which is a safe Tory seat. He put a bet against himself that he would lose it. Even though he's suspended by Labour and also under investigation, his name will still appear on the ballot paper. Kevin Craig apologised for what he described as a huge mistake. This is pretty different from what we're talking about with the Conservative betting scandal.
Yeah, it's like what I was saying, you don't really want to conflate the whole, the whole thing together. It's probably not okay because he does have a tiny bit of power over whether he will probably lose that seat. It's a 23,000 Conservative majority. My assumption when I heard it was, he's put a bet on himself to lose so that if he by some miracle wins, he'll be happy. Yeah. If he loses, which he probably does, he'll be like, oh, well, I won 50 quid. Yes. Or whatever. He came out in a statement and said, I was going to give the money to charity. Yeah. Which is what he's said. So let's go with that. We could all look at that seat and be like, this guy's probably going to lose.
And now, last but not least, here's Paul Thomas, the Reform Party candidate for Maidstone and Malling, giving the Spice Girls a bad name on the campaign trail.
I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I want a Reform win.
That's one of the worst things I've ever seen.
You're having a bad day today.
I'm having a bad day. I've seen Nick Robinson wave a burger to make a point about climate change, and I've seen a man. I don't even know.
Was he on top of a bus? Where was he?
What I don't understand is I've never seen someone lack rhythm in speech. I actually didn't think that was possible.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was possible to betray a lack of rhythm just by speaking the lyrics to a song.
So let's describe it for the listeners. We have a Reform candidate going onto a stage atop of something to say, tell you what you want, really, really want. He sort of jiggles around a bit like, a dad at a disco. And then it's like, summon up a beloved song and then add a bit of racism at the end. That's sort of what he's doing there.
It's just so deadpan. That's the thing, isn't it? You think it's going to come up to a climax and then it's just a Reform win. Okay.
Which we know what that means.
You built me up a little bit and then you really let me down at the end.
Well, you know what would be a better song? Stop right now. Thank you very much. I need somebody with a human touch. Not this guy. My God.
I should say for listeners, and you did quite a rhythmical dance.
I did do a rhythmical dance.
That was enjoyable.
I was also going to go for Who Do You Think You Are? But then actually that song goes into
It also has a really long who. So you would have had to go. It's the song I've chosen is who.
Because it goes into you have got to swing it, shake it, move it, make it. I was like, I don't want him to do that.
What the hell has this show devolved into?
Sorry, you got
just
the girls
you two.
in. Lizzie B for the girls. Do you know what I mean?
I feel like I'm on a hen night.
You are welcome.
And that's it for the show. Thank you, Liz Bates. Thank you for joining us.
That's the end of our coverage of the election.
Yes.
End on a high.
Listeners and viewers, do join us on Sunday for a chat with a rather famous ex-Tory as, Rory Stewart is joining us on the couch.
But before we go, Liz Bates, as ever, thank you so much for joining us on Pod Save the UK.
We want to hear your thoughts. Email us at psuk@reducelistening.co.uk or drop us a voice note on WhatsApp. Our number is 07494 933 444. Internationally, that's +44 7494 933 444.
Don't forget to follow @PodSaveTheUK on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter, and you can find us on YouTube. Catch full episodes and highlights from us there in colour and everything. And you can drop us a review too if you like.
Pod Save the UK is a reduced listening production for Crooked Media.
Thanks to producer May Robson, senior producer James Tyndale, and digital producer Alex Bishop.
Video editing is by David Kaplowitz, and our theme music is by Vasilis Fotopoulos.
Thanks to our engineer Hannah Stewart.
The executive producers are Anushka Sharma, Dan Jackson, and Madeline Herringer, with additional support from Ari Schwartz.
Remember to hit subscribe for new shows on Thursdays on Amazon, Spotify, or Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.